Have you ever gone through something that made absolutely no sense to your mind, yet somewhere deep inside you there was a quiet feeling that perhaps your life was not falling apart at all? Perhaps you are in such a moment now. A relationship has changed. A door has closed. Someone you trusted has walked away. A plan you believed in has been delayed. Or maybe nothing dramatic has happened on the outside, yet inside you there is a strange restlessness, as though the life you have been living no longer fits the person you are becoming. The mind does not like these moments. It wants answers. It wants reasons. It wants a map showing exactly where this road is going and why you had to travel it in the first place. The mind says, "Explain this to me, and then I will be peaceful." It says, "Tell me what happens next, and then I will relax." It searches through yesterday, replaying conversations, examining decisions, wondering what you should have said, what you should have noticed, what you could have done differently. And perhaps you have noticed how exhausting this becomes. There are nights when the body is tired, but the mind continues moving. It travels backward into memories and forward into imagined futures. It creates conversations that never happened and prepares for difficulties that may never come. You may lie there wanting nothing more than a little peace, yet something inside you keeps insisting that peace cannot arrive until everything is understood. But what if peace does not require understanding everything? What if there are moments in life when your deepest wisdom cannot be reached through more thinking? There is a part of you that analyzes life, compares experiences, remembers pain, anticipates danger, and tries to organize everything into a story that makes sense. This part has value. The mind is a remarkable instrument. It helps you move through the practical world, but you are more than the instrument. Behind the thoughts is the one who notices the thoughts. Behind the fear is the awareness that can observe the fear. Behind the confusion is a quiet presence that does not become confused simply because the mind has temporarily lost its direction. You may call that presence your soul. You may call it spirit, awareness, your higher self, or your connection with the source. The name matters less than the experience. It is that quiet place within you where you do not need to defend yourself, prove yourself, or know everything in advance. It is the place that sometimes whispers very softly, "You can trust this moment, even though you cannot yet explain it." Think of a time when something left your life and you believed at first that you would never recover from it. Perhaps you lost a relationship you thought would last forever. At the time, the ending may have looked only like rejection. Your mind may have searched for reasons. Why was I not enough? What did I do wrong? Why did this person change? Why did life allow me to care so deeply if it was going to end this way? Months or years later, you may have looked back and seen something you could not see while standing inside the pain. Perhaps the relationship had required you to abandon too much of yourself. Perhaps you had become so concerned with being loved that you had forgotten to ask whether you were living in love. Perhaps the ending pushed you toward an inner strength, honesty, or self-respect that you would not otherwise have discovered. The event did not suddenly become pleasant. Pain does not need to be romanticized in order for wisdom to emerge from it, but your perspective became larger than the pain. This is one of life's quiet mysteries. The mind sees the chapter. Something deeper seems capable of sensing the whole book. A seed beneath the soil has no evidence that spring is coming. If it could think as we do, perhaps it would look around at the darkness and conclude that something had gone terribly wrong. It cannot see the sunlight above it. It cannot see the garden it may become. It knows only pressure, darkness, and the strange breaking open of what it once was. And yet, the breaking is part of the becoming. There may be places in your life right now that feel exactly like that darkness beneath the soil. You may be asking why progress seems invisible, why prayers appear unanswered, why the old path has disappeared before the new one has become clear. The mind may call this being stuck. Your deeper awareness may see it as a season of preparation. This does not mean every difficulty has been deliberately placed in your path or that you should ignore pain and pretend everything is wonderful. Spiritual awareness is not pretending. It is learning to meet reality without adding another layer of suffering through endless resistance. There is pain, and then there is the story we create around the pain. Someone disappoints you. That is painful. Then the mind says, "People always leave me. I can never trust anyone. I will always be alone." Now the wound has become an identity. Something does not happen when you expected it to happen. That is frustrating. Then the mind says, "I am behind. Everyone else is moving forward. I have missed my chance." Now a delay has become a judgment about your worth. You look at another person's life and notice what they seem to have: their relationship, their confidence, their home, their apparent sense of direction. The mind begins measuring your private struggles against their visible circumstances. Soon you are no longer simply living your life, you are standing outside of it, judging it. And perhaps the invitation is to return. Return from comparison. Return from yesterday. Return from the imagined future. Return from the endless effort to understand what cannot yet be understood. Return to this breath. Return to yourself. There is something very gentle about recognizing that you do not need to solve your entire life today. You only need to meet this moment consciously. You may not know whether a certain person will remain in your life, but you can ask whether you are meeting them from love or fear. You may not know whether a particular opportunity will appear, but you can notice whether you are allowing uncertainty to steal today's peace. You may not understand why something ended, but you can begin asking whether carrying resentment is helping you become more deeply yourself. The mind asks, how can I control what happens? The soul seems to ask, how can I remain aligned with love while life unfolds? Those are very different questions. One creates tension because it places your peace in the hands of circumstances. The other returns responsibility to the only place where you truly have power, your inner response. Imagine standing beside a river. You can spend the entire day arguing with the direction of the water. You can demand that it reverse itself. You can become angry because it is not flowing toward the place you want it to go. You can exhaust yourself fighting the current. Or you can become still enough to notice the river. You can listen. You can learn how it moves. You can discover that surrender does not mean allowing yourself to drown. Sometimes surrender means stepping out of the current. Sometimes it means swimming. Sometimes it means resting on the bank until you can see clearly again. Surrender simply means that you stop demanding that the river becomes something other than what it is before you allow yourself to be present. Many people postpone peace in this way. I will be peaceful when they apologize. I will be peaceful when I know what comes next. I will be peaceful when my family understands me. I will be peaceful when my past finally makes sense. I will be peaceful when I stop feeling uncertain. But if peace depends upon life obeying your conditions, then peace will always remain fragile. There is another possibility. You can begin to discover a peace that exists before the answer arrives. You can forgive before the other person understands what they did. You can breathe before the future becomes certain. You can love yourself before everyone approves of who you are becoming. You can trust that not knowing is sometimes part of knowing more deeply. Perhaps this is what your soul has been trying to tell you. Not that nothing matters. Not that you should become indifferent. Not that you should stop thinking or stop making wise choices. But that there is a kind of intelligence within you that becomes difficult to hear when the mind is shouting. And that intelligence rarely shouts back. It waits in silence. It appears in the pause between two thoughts. It comes when you stop trying to force an answer. It may arrive while you are walking beneath trees, sitting quietly in the morning, looking at the sky, or simply allowing yourself to feel what you have spent months trying to explain. You may suddenly recognize, I do not need to know everything right now. And in that recognition, something softens. The shoulders release. The breath becomes deeper. The heart no longer feels like it has to solve the mystery of existence before sunset. You begin to remember that you are not merely the frightened voice asking questions. You are also the quiet awareness listening to those questions. And perhaps the next stage of your journey is not about finding more answers. Perhaps it is about discovering what has been preventing you from hearing the wisdom that was already there. Because very often between you and that quiet inner knowing stands something familiar. The part of the mind that wants control, approval, certainty, comparison, and protection at any cost. And when you begin to recognize that voice without fighting it, something remarkable can happen. You start to see that the ego was never your enemy. It was simply trying to keep you safe in the only way it knew how. But you no longer have to let fear decide what your life means. There comes a moment in spiritual growth when you begin to recognize that much of your suffering is not created by life itself, but by the mind's insistence that life should be different from what it is. This is where the ego becomes important to understand. The ego is not something you need to destroy. It is not an enemy hiding inside you. It is simply the part of your identity that has learned to survive through comparison, control, approval, fear, separation, and attachment. It creates a picture of who you think you must be in order to feel safe. It says you must be admired. You must be understood. You must be chosen. You must know what happens next. You must avoid rejection. You must make the right decision every time. And because these conditions are impossible to maintain, the ego is rarely at rest. You may notice this in very ordinary moments. Someone does not answer your message as quickly as you expected. The event itself is small, but the mind begins creating meaning around the silence. Perhaps they are upset with you. Perhaps they no longer care. Perhaps you said something wrong. Perhaps you are being rejected. Within minutes, you are no longer experiencing a delayed reply. You are experiencing an entire story created by fear. The ego is very skilled at turning uncertainty into conclusions. And most of those conclusions have one thing in common. They make you feel separate from love. This is why awareness is so powerful. Awareness allows you to notice the story before you become the story. You can say quietly to yourself, I notice that my mind is afraid right now. That is very different from saying everything is going wrong. One statement describes a passing state of mind. The other turns that state into reality. There is enormous freedom in the space between those two things. Imagine the sky on a stormy afternoon. Dark clouds move across it. Thunder may appear. Rain may fall heavily. But the sky itself has not become the storm. It contains the storm while remaining larger than it. Your awareness is like that sky. Thoughts come, fear comes, jealousy comes, anger comes, confusion comes. They may be intense, they may feel convincing, but they are weather moving through consciousness. You do not have to become every storm that visits you. The ego, however, wants you to identify with every cloud. If fear appears, it says, I am afraid because danger must be coming. If jealousy appears, it says their success proves something is missing from me. If anger appears, it says I cannot be peaceful until that person changes. If uncertainty appears, it says I cannot trust life until I know what happens next. And slowly, without realizing it, you begin living as though every emotion were an instruction. But emotions are not always instructions. Sometimes they are invitations to look deeper. When fear appears, you might ask, what am I trying to control? When jealousy appears, you might ask, what am I believing about my own worth? When resentment appears, you might ask, what am I still demanding from the past? When anxiety appears, you might ask, what future am I trying to live before it arrives? These questions do not immediately remove discomfort. They do something more important. They bring consciousness into the discomfort. And what you can observe with love begins to lose its power to control you unconsciously. Consider comparison. Perhaps you have looked at someone's life and felt that you should be farther along by now. Maybe someone younger seems more certain of their direction. Someone you know appears to have found the relationship you wanted. Another person seems peaceful while you are still working through old wounds. The ego quickly creates a ranking system. Ahead, behind, winning, losing, chosen, forgotten, successful, failing. But life may not be a race at all. A tree does not look across the forest and become ashamed because another tree has already produced fruit. It does not ask why its branches are different. It does not spend spring resenting winter. It responds to the intelligence of its own nature. There may be wisdom for you in that. Your path does not need to resemble another person's path in order to be meaningful. Your timing does not need to resemble another person's timing in order to be sacred. You are not late to your own life. You may simply be learning something that cannot be hurried. Sometimes the season that feels like delay is teaching patience. Sometimes the relationship that does not work is revealing where you abandoned yourself. Sometimes loneliness is exposing how much of your identity depended on being needed. Sometimes uncertainty is slowly dissolving the illusion that you were ever supposed to control everything. This can feel uncomfortable because the ego prefers certainty, even painful certainty, to open space. You may have noticed yourself returning to situations that hurt you simply because they were familiar. A relationship where you were constantly seeking approval. A friendship where you had to shrink yourself. A family pattern in which keeping the peace meant betraying your own truth. The ego often chooses familiar suffering over unfamiliar freedom. Why? Because familiar suffering gives the mind a role. It knows what to expect. It knows how to protect itself. It knows who to blame. Freedom can initially feel frightening because freedom asks, who are you without this old pattern? Suppose you have spent years being the person who pleases everyone. You learn to read the room before you read your own heart. You became skilled at anticipating what others needed from you. You said yes when something inside whispered no. You smiled when you were hurt. You stayed silent to avoid conflict. Perhaps you believed this was love. But love and self-abandonment are not the same thing. Sometimes people-pleasing is fear wearing the clothing of kindness. It says, if everyone is comfortable with me, then I will be safe. But there is a quiet cost to living this way. Eventually, you may realize that everyone knows a version of you except you, and then life creates an invitation. Perhaps someone becomes disappointed when you finally say no. Perhaps a relationship changes when you stop overgiving. Perhaps you are accused of changing because you are no longer willing to disappear. The ego immediately panics. What if they leave? What if they misunderstand me? What if I am selfish? And here is where a deeper form of awareness can enter. You can ask, am I acting from love or am I acting from fear of losing approval? There will not always be an easy answer, but the question itself brings you closer to yourself. Love does not require you to control another person's opinion of you. Love allows others to have their reactions while you remain honest about what is true within you. This is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is the beginning of inner integrity. The same pattern appears in our need to control the future. You may believe that if you think about something long enough, you can prevent pain. You rehearse every possible outcome. You prepare every response. You imagine what might go wrong. The mind calls this preparation. Sometimes it is. But sometimes it is simply fear trying to experience tomorrow before tomorrow exists. And the price you pay is today. Think about how much life disappears while you are waiting for certainty. You are sitting with someone you love, but your mind is worrying about what happens next month. You are walking outside on a beautiful morning, but you are replaying yesterday. You are eating a meal, but mentally you are solving a problem that cannot be solved yet. The body is here. The mind is somewhere else. And the soul seems to keep whispering, come back. Come back to where your life is actually happening. This breath, this conversation, this moment. Not because the future does not matter, but because the future is shaped by the consciousness you bring to the present. You cannot live tomorrow today. You can only meet today in a way that prepares your heart for whatever tomorrow brings. There is another ego pattern that causes enormous suffering, attachment. Attachment says, this must happen in exactly this way for me to be okay. Perhaps you want a particular relationship, a particular reconciliation, a particular outcome, a particular answer. There is nothing wrong with desire. The question is whether your desire has become a condition for peace. When you attach your inner well-being to one specific outcome, you quietly tell life, I will only cooperate with you if you give me what I have already decided is best. But what if you do not yet know what is best? Think of how many things you once wanted desperately that, looking back, you are grateful did not happen. Perhaps there was a person you thought you could not live without, a path you were certain you had to follow, an identity you worked very hard to protect. At the time, losing it felt like failure. Later, you could see the space that loss created. The soul sometimes seems willing to release what the ego is still trying to negotiate with. This does not mean you should suppress desire or stop caring. It means you can hold your desires with open hands. You can say, this is what I hope for, but I am willing to remain awake to a wisdom larger than my current understanding. There is humility in that. And humility is very different from helplessness. Helplessness says, nothing I do matters. Surrender says, my actions matter, but I do not control the entire universe. You can plant the seed. You can water it. You can care for the soil, but you cannot pull the plant upward and force it to grow faster. There are processes in life that cannot be rushed by anxiety. Healing is one of them. Perhaps you have been frustrated with yourself because you are still affected by something you thought you should be over. The ego creates another timeline. You should have healed by now. You should not still care. You should be stronger than this. But healing rarely moves in a straight line. It is more like the ocean. A wave comes in. A wave moves out. Some days you feel light. Other days an old memory returns. This does not mean you are going backward. It may simply mean another layer is asking to be met with awareness. Can you imagine speaking to yourself in those moments without judgment? Instead of saying, why am I still like this? You might say, something in me is hurting today. Can I meet it with kindness? That simple shift changes the energy completely. The ego wants to correct you. Awareness wants to understand you. The ego says, fix this. Love says, stay with this. And often, what has been waiting for years is not another solution. It is compassionate attention. You may find that beneath anger there is grief. Beneath jealousy there is fear. Beneath people-pleasing there is a longing to be loved. Beneath control there is vulnerability. When you see this, you become less interested in fighting yourself. You begin listening instead. And the more deeply you listen, the more you discover that many of the voices you have been obeying are not truly yours. Perhaps you inherited beliefs about what a successful life should look like. Perhaps you learned that being loved meant never disappointing anyone. Perhaps you learned that strength meant never crying. Perhaps you learned that forgiveness meant allowing people to hurt you repeatedly. Perhaps you learned that spirituality meant never experiencing anger, sadness, or doubt. Awareness begins questioning these assumptions. Not aggressively, just honestly. Is this true? Is this mine? Does this belief bring me closer to love, or does it keep me living in fear? The answers may surprise you, because sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is stop pretending. Stop pretending you are not hurt. Stop pretending you do not need rest. Stop pretending a relationship is healthy because you are afraid of being alone. Stop pretending you know what comes next. There is tremendous peace in saying, I don't know. The ego often experiences those words as weakness. The soul may experience them as openness. I don't know what this ending means yet. I don't know why this person entered my life. I don't know why the timing has changed. I don't know what comes next. And then perhaps you can add, but I am willing to remain present. That willingness changes everything. You are no longer using spiritual ideas to escape life. You are meeting life. You feel what needs to be felt. You make the decisions that are yours to make. You release what does not belong to you. And gradually, the need to control becomes less intense because you begin trusting your ability to meet whatever appears. This is a very different kind of security. The ego says security means knowing what will happen. Awareness begins to discover that security can mean knowing that whatever happens, you will not abandon yourself. You will return to your breath. You will return to love. You will return to stillness. You will ask for help when you need it. You will forgive when you are ready. You will begin again when a chapter closes. You will remember that your worth did not disappear because someone failed to recognize it. You will remember that a delay does not define your destiny. You will remember that uncertainty is not proof that the source has forgotten you. When you begin living from this place, something subtle changes. The mind still thinks, fear may still visit, the ego still speaks. But you no longer have to hand each thought the keys to your life. You can hear the fearful voice and say, thank you for trying to protect me, but I am going to listen more deeply. And beneath the noise, there may be a quieter knowing, a knowing that does not explain everything, a knowing that does not promise you will never feel pain, a knowing that simply reminds you, you are still here. You are still whole beneath the confusion. You are still connected to something greater than the story your mind is telling. And perhaps this is where the next part of the journey begins. Not by defeating the ego, but by no longer mistaking it for your deepest self. Because once you stop asking fear to tell you who you are, you create space for another voice to emerge. The voice of forgiveness, the voice of trust, the voice of love, the voice that has been beneath all the noise, waiting patiently for you to come home. There is a point on the inner journey when understanding the ego is no longer enough. You begin to see the patterns, you notice the fear, you recognize the need for control, you become aware of the old stories. But then a deeper question appears. If I am not these fears, these wounds, these expectations, and these roles, then who am I? This question cannot be answered by adding another label. You are not becoming a better version of the identity you have been defending. You are beginning to remember what existed before the defenses were created. Before you learn to please everyone, before you learn to compare yourself, before someone else's rejection became evidence against your worth, before disappointment taught you to expect disappointment, there was a quieter presence within you. It is still there. You may have forgotten how to hear it, but it has never disappeared. Returning to your true self is not about creating a perfect spiritual personality. It is not about becoming endlessly calm, never feeling anger, never becoming afraid, or pretending that painful experiences no longer affect you. That would simply be another performance. Returning means becoming honest enough to meet yourself without judgment. It means allowing what is true to be seen. Perhaps there is grief you have been carrying quietly. Perhaps there is someone you still resent. Perhaps there is a decision you continue to punish yourself for. Perhaps you have spent years wishing you had been different in a moment that has already passed. The mind believes that holding on will somehow correct the past. But the past cannot be corrected by suffering in the present. It can only be understood, integrated, and eventually released. This is where forgiveness becomes one of the most powerful forms of inner freedom. Forgiveness is often misunderstood because people think it means approving of what happened. It does not. You can forgive someone and still recognize that what they did was harmful. You can forgive and still keep a boundary. You can forgive and still choose not to return. You can forgive without receiving an apology. Forgiveness is not primarily about changing the other person. It is about changing your relationship with what happened inside you. Imagine carrying a stone everywhere you go because someone once placed it in your hand. At first, the stone represents the injury. You have every reason to notice its weight. But years later, the person who hurt you may be nowhere near you, and yet you are still carrying the stone. You bring it into new relationships. You bring it into quiet evenings. You bring it into conversations with people who never caused the wound. Eventually, you may realize that putting the stone down does not mean the original injury was acceptable. It means you no longer want the injury deciding how much freedom you are allowed to feel today. Sometimes the person you most need to forgive is yourself. You look backward with today's awareness and judge the person you were then. You ask, how could I have stayed? How could I have trusted them? How could I have made that choice? But perhaps the version of you who made that decision did not know what you know now. Perhaps that version was lonely, perhaps frightened, perhaps desperate to be loved, perhaps trying to survive. What if, instead of standing over your former self as a judge, you sat beside that person with compassion? You might discover that shame begins to soften when it is finally met by understanding. The younger you does not need another accusation. That person may need to hear you were doing the best you could with the awareness you had. This does not remove responsibility. It changes responsibility into wisdom. You stop saying, I should never have been that person. You begin saying, I can choose differently now. And that is where intention enters the journey. Intention is not forcing life to obey you. It is deciding the quality of consciousness you wish to bring to your life. You may not control who stays, but you can intend to remain loving without abandoning yourself. You may not control whether someone understands you, but you can intend to speak honestly and peacefully. You may not control the timing of an answer, but you can intend to meet the waiting without turning against yourself. This is a quieter kind of power. It does not dominate circumstances. It aligns you with what feels most true. Perhaps you have spent much of your life setting intentions about what you want life to give you. What if you also began setting intentions about who you wish to be while life unfolds? I intend to meet this day with less judgment. I intend to notice when fear is speaking. I intend to choose love where I once chose defensiveness. I intend to release what I cannot control. There is something deeply peaceful about shifting your attention from controlling outcomes to choosing your inner orientation. It is like adjusting the direction of a sailboat. You do not control the wind. You learn how to meet the wind. Some days life feels gentle. Other days the wind changes suddenly. The relationship you trusted changes. The plan is interrupted. A season ends before you are ready. You cannot command the wind to return to yesterday, but you can learn to adjust your sail. This is surrender. Not collapse, not defeat, not spiritual passivity. Surrender is the willingness to stop arguing with reality long enough to hear what this moment may be asking of you. Sometimes surrender says, stay. Sometimes it says, leave. Sometimes it says, wait. Sometimes it says, speak. Sometimes it says, you have done enough. Rest now. The mind often wants a universal rule because rules feel safe. The soul seems to respond to the living truth of the moment, and that requires stillness. Think about how rarely we allow ourselves to become truly still. Even when the room is quiet, the mind may be full of noise. We reach for a screen. We search for another opinion. We ask another person what they think we should do. We look for reassurance. None of this is wrong, but sometimes every external voice makes the inner voice harder to hear. There are decisions that cannot be made through consensus. There are moments when you must sit quietly with yourself and ask, what feels peaceful beneath the fear? not what feels easiest, not what protects your image, not what keeps everyone happy. What feels deeply aligned? The answer may not arrive as a sentence. It may arrive as a sense of expansion, a quiet relief, a soft knowing, or perhaps only as the recognition that one direction requires you to betray yourself while another allows you to remain whole. The soul often speaks through simplicity. The ego produces arguments. The deeper self tends to become clearer when the arguments grow quiet. This is why trust matters. Trust is not the belief that everything will happen exactly as you want. That would still be control. Trust is the willingness to believe that you can remain connected to yourself even when life takes an unexpected direction. Perhaps you are waiting for something right now, an answer, a change, healing, a reconciliation, a new beginning. Waiting can feel unbearable when you believe nothing meaningful is happening. But think of winter. A tree in winter can look lifeless. Its branches are empty. Nothing appears to be growing. If you judge the tree by appearances alone, you might think life had abandoned it. Yet beneath the surface, something remains. The tree is not failing. It is in a season where visible growth is not the purpose. Your life has seasons like this. There may be periods when your greatest work is invisible. Learning to stop chasing approval. Learning to sit with loneliness without running back to what harmed you. Learning to forgive. Learning to become comfortable with your own company. Learning to trust yourself again. From the outside, these seasons may look uneventful. Inside, an entire life is being rearranged. A new relationship with yourself is growing roots. And roots are rarely visible. This is why comparing your life to someone else's visible fruit can be so painful. You cannot see their roots, and they cannot see yours. The soul does not seem interested in keeping score. It invites you into presence, into this season, into this lesson, into this breath. And when you begin meeting life this way, gratitude changes too. Gratitude no longer means pretending that everything feels good. It means becoming willing to recognize that even in uncertainty, life still contains something sacred. A quiet morning, a conversation, a body that has carried you through another day. A lesson you did not ask for but are beginning to understand. A person who showed you kindness. A boundary you finally found the courage to create. A moment when you noticed yourself responding differently than you would have a year ago. These things matter. They remind you that transformation is often subtle. You may be changing in ways your mind has not yet measured. Maybe you no longer chase people who withdraw. Maybe you recover more quickly from comparison. Maybe you can feel fear without immediately obeying it. Maybe you have stopped explaining yourself to everyone. Maybe the silence that once frightened you is beginning to feel peaceful. These changes are signs of returning. You are not becoming someone entirely new. You are letting go of what kept you separated from what was already true. There is a beautiful paradox here. The more you release your need to become enough, the more you begin to recognize that your worth was never in question. The more you stop chasing love, the more capable you become of living from love. The more you release control, the more deeply you experience your own inner strength. The more you accept uncertainty, the less uncertainty controls you. And perhaps this is what your mind has struggled to understand. Your deepest transformation may not come from finally getting everything you wanted. It may come from discovering that your peace was never meant to depend on whether you got it. This is not detachment in the sense of not caring. It is loving without possession, hoping without demanding, acting without forcing, trusting without needing guarantees. You still participate fully in your life. You simply stop asking every person, every outcome, and every circumstance to tell you who you are. Your identity begins returning to something quieter. You become the one who can love, the one who can forgive, the one who can witness a thought without becoming imprisoned by it, the one who can lose something and still remain connected to life, the one who can enter uncertainty without immediately assuming you have been abandoned. There may even come a moment when you look back at a difficult season and feel gratitude. Not gratitude that you suffered. Gratitude for what you discovered within yourself while moving through it. Perhaps the loss showed you where you were giving your power away. Perhaps the rejection forced you to stop rejecting yourself. Perhaps the delay taught you to stop measuring your worth by a timeline. Perhaps loneliness returned you to your own inner presence. Life does not always explain itself while it is happening. Sometimes understanding comes later, and sometimes it never comes in the form the mind wants. There may be questions you carry for years. Why this person? Why this ending? Why this timing? Why this path? But perhaps some questions do not need to be solved in order for the heart to become peaceful. Perhaps they can become open spaces, places where humility enters, places where trust grows, places where you say, I do not know why this happened, but I know I do not want to spend the rest of my life fighting it. That is a sacred turning point. Because the moment you stop fighting what cannot be changed, energy becomes available for what can be changed. Your response, your intention, your boundaries, your willingness to love again, your willingness to forgive yourself, your willingness to begin the morning without carrying yesterday into every new hour. This is alignment, not arranging the world perfectly around you, bringing yourself into harmony with the deepest qualities you wish to live from. Peace, compassion, truth, love, presence, and perhaps source is not something far away that you must somehow reach. Perhaps your connection to the source becomes most visible when you stop separating yourself from these qualities. When you forgive, you feel closer. When you release judgment, you feel closer. When you sit quietly and stop demanding answers, you feel closer. When you choose love instead of fear, even imperfectly, you feel closer. You may discover that the path home was never somewhere outside of you. It was beneath the noise, beneath the effort, beneath the need to prove, beneath the endless question, what will happen to me? And as that question softens, another one can begin to emerge. How do I want to meet this life while I am here? Perhaps that is the question your soul has been waiting for. Because when you begin living from that question, the future no longer has to reveal everything before you take your next peaceful step. You can move without seeing the entire road. You can love without guarantees. You can forgive without rewriting history. You can let go without knowing what will replace what you release. You can trust the next step without demanding to see the destination. And slowly, almost quietly, you begin to understand something that cannot be fully explained. You were never asked to know everything. You were invited to remain present enough to recognize the wisdom that reveals itself one moment at a time. And once you begin living from that place, spiritual truth is no longer something you merely think about. It becomes something you practice in the ordinary moments of your life. There is a quiet shift that begins to happen when you stop asking life to explain itself before you allow yourself to live it. You begin to notice that peace is not waiting somewhere at the end of the road. It is available in the way you walk the road. It is in the moment you catch yourself overthinking and choose to return to your breath. It is in the moment you feel the old urge to control someone else's response, yet decide to remain honest and calm. It is in the moment you remember that another person's opinion does not have the authority to define your worth. This is how spiritual understanding becomes a way of living, not through one dramatic realization, but through many small returns. You return to awareness when fear takes over. You return to compassion when judgment appears. You return to forgiveness when the past tries to pull you backward. You return to stillness when the mind becomes noisy. You return to love when the ego tries to convince you that separation is the only way to feel safe. And perhaps that is all the spiritual path really asks of you. Not perfection, not constant certainty, simply the willingness to return. You may wake tomorrow morning and immediately notice your mind beginning its familiar work. It may remind you of what is unresolved. It may bring up a person you are worried about. It may tell you how much needs to be figured out. Before following every thought, you might allow yourself one quiet moment. Just breathe. Feel the air entering and leaving your body. Notice that before the first problem is solved, you are already alive. There is already something here. Presence, awareness, a stillness beneath the movement of thought. You do not have to force your mind to become silent. Simply notice that you are the one hearing it. That awareness itself can become a small doorway into peace. During the day, you may notice yourself comparing. Someone appears happier. Someone seems farther ahead. Someone has received something you have been waiting for. Instead of criticizing yourself for feeling comparison, pause and become curious. You might ask gently, what am I believing this person's life says about mine? Perhaps the mind believes there is not enough love, opportunity, or time to go around. Perhaps it believes someone else's arrival means you have been forgotten. Then you can remember that life is not asking you to copy another person's season. The rose does not lose its beauty because the sunflower blooms differently. You are allowed to live the life that is unfolding through you. There is no need to force your rhythm to match someone else's. And when resentment appears, as it sometimes will, you might practice forgiveness in a simple way. Not by forcing yourself to feel something you do not yet feel, not by pretending you are no longer hurt, but by saying, I am willing to stop feeding this pain. That willingness is enough to begin. Forgiveness may happen gradually, one memory at a time, one reaction at a time. One day when you realize that you thought about the person and the anger was no longer quite as strong. That is freedom beginning quietly. You may also practice releasing yourself from the need to know. At the end of the day, there may still be unanswered questions. Instead of taking every question into the night with you, imagine placing them down for a while. You could say inwardly, what I need to know can become clear when the time is right. Tonight, I choose rest. This is not denial. It is trust. A farmer does not dig up the seed each evening to see whether it has begun to grow. There comes a point when the seed must be left in the darkness. Life is like that too. Some things require your attention. Others require your patience. Wisdom is learning the difference. Gratitude can help you remember this. Not the kind of gratitude that asks you to deny what hurts, but the kind that reminds you that pain is never the whole picture. You can be uncertain and still be grateful for the person who called you today. You can be grieving and still notice the morning light. You can feel lost and still be grateful for one breath, one meal, one safe moment, one small reason to continue. Gratitude does not erase difficulty. It widens the field of awareness, so difficulty is no longer the only thing you can see. And from that wider place, life often feels less threatening. You begin to recognize how many moments you once called ordinary were quietly sacred. A cup of tea, a walk, a conversation, a few minutes of silence, a familiar voice, the feeling of sunlight on your face. Perhaps peace was never as complicated as the mind made it. Perhaps it was simply hidden beneath constant wanting. You may begin to notice something else as well. The more deeply you trust your inner life, the less desperate you become for everyone else to understand you. You can listen to advice without surrendering your own discernment. You can love people without making them responsible for your sense of self. You can say no without turning the other person into an enemy. You can walk away from what is unhealthy without carrying hatred with you. You can remain soft without becoming unprotected. This is what inner freedom begins to look like. You stop confusing peace with passivity. Sometimes peace means speaking. Sometimes peace means creating distance. Sometimes peace means admitting that you were wrong. Sometimes peace means refusing to continue a pattern that keeps wounding you. There is no single outward appearance of alignment. What matters is the consciousness from which you act. Are you acting to punish or to protect what is true? Are you trying to control? Or are you responding with clarity? Are you trying to prove your worth? Or are you remembering that your worth does not need proof? These questions can become quiet companions. And little by little, you may begin to feel less divided within yourself. The mind no longer has to know everything. The heart no longer has to carry everything. The past no longer has to explain everything. You become willing to live with some mystery. And mystery does not feel as frightening as it once did. It begins to feel spacious. There is room for surprise, room for grace, room for a path you did not plan, room for something new to emerge after an ending. Perhaps this is why certain chapters of life make sense only after we have stopped trying so hard to understand them. You discover that the delay taught you patience. The loss returned you to yourself. The disappointment showed you where you had placed your happiness outside of you. The silence made you listen more deeply. The uncertainty taught you trust. And even then, you do not have to conclude that every painful event happened for a specific reason. Sometimes life remains mysterious. The deeper freedom is knowing that even when the reason remains hidden, you can still choose what you bring to the experience. You can bring awareness. You can bring compassion. You can bring forgiveness. You can bring patience. You can bring love. And perhaps that is where your true power has always been. Not in controlling every chapter, but in choosing the spirit with which you enter it. So as you move forward from this moment, there may be one simple truth worth carrying with you. Your mind does not need to understand the whole journey before your soul can trust the next step. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to release an old story. You are allowed to forgive. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to become quieter inside. And perhaps you are not becoming someone new at all. Perhaps you are simply remembering the self that was there before fear told you who you had to be. The self beneath comparison. The self beneath people-pleasing. The self beneath resentment. The self beneath the need to control. The self that knows how to be present. The self that still recognizes love. The self that remains connected to the source even when the road ahead is hidden. If something in this journey has touched a place within you, you might share in the comments what you are learning to trust without fully understanding. Sometimes putting that reflection into words helps another person recognize that they are not alone in their own season of uncertainty. And if these quiet spiritual conversations help you return to yourself, you are welcome to subscribe and continue this journey with us. For now, there is nothing else you need to solve. Take one slow breath. Let today be enough. Let this moment be enough. And remember that beneath every question your mind is still asking, there may be a deeper wisdom quietly waiting, not asking you to understand everything, only asking you to become still enough to hear it.